Hello everyone, I am Demented Kirby, and welcome to my channel, The Commander Tavern. The Commander Tavern is a channel dedicated to my favorite Magic the Gathering format. The Brewery is a series on this channel showcasing my spicy brews and other deck techs. This series often contains episodes with commanders requested by viewers or patrons. But on this special episode of The Brewery, I will be discussing a brew 4 months in the making, just for this occasion. The Lord of the Realm wished to celebrate this day of peak consumerism, known as Black Friday, by indulging in the most expensive deck possible. On top of that, some establishments commence Black Friday sales and begin their operations on Thanksgiving Day afternoon without even waiting for it to actually be Friday. Therefore, he also tasked me with preparing this brew to be presented to the court on this day while they feast. Yet, with the greatest amount of respect and veneration possible, I informed the Lord that 1996 World Champion isn't considered part of the vintage card pool and thus cannot be used in Commander. His Grace knew this. He also knew that only a single copy of this card exists. Being the Lord of the Realm, he figured that, for this very reason, this is the deck for him, a deck only he would be able to wield. And his law made it legal in the realm. Since my Commander Tavern is within said realms, I heeded the call and brewed with only the finest ingredients possible. The result is this golden brew, worthy of the lords, ladies, and whales of the realm. 1996 World Champion is a star legendary creature with Shroud for Wooburg. Its power and toughness are each equal to the life total of target opponent. It also has an ability that triggers at the beginning of your upkeep, where you can pay 0 and discard your hand in order to search your library for 1996 World Champion and put it on top of your library. However, this ability can only be done if the card is in your library. Fun fact, this card is actually the first 5-colored card designed. Curiously, unlike the other celebratory cards or special cards Wizards made, this one is not on a sticker placed on a Magic card. It also has the dimensions and shape of a standard Magic card. It even has the normal card back. So this card is not like Robot Chicken, which is a sticker on a Magic card, or the Heroes of the Realm cards, which have a special back. This card was encased in the trophy, but it was actually printed on a normal Magic sheet, which was then destroyed all except for that one singular card. Therefore, before Wizards refined the definition of what made a card vintage legal, this card actually complied with all criteria for being legal in vintage, meaning that it was technically legal in Commander for a time. Had the actual 1996 World Champion Tom Shanfeng wanted to build a Commander deck, he would have been able to. It also has built-in tuck prevention for when that rule existed. However, since then, the vintage card pool was specified to the following sentence taken straight from Wizards. Vintage decks may consist of cards from all Magic card sets plus the following cards: Sewers of Estark, Mana Crypt, Windseeker Centaur, and Nalathni Dragon. Notice that it mentions all promos by name except for 1996 World Champion. Since Commander follows the vintage card pool, 1996 World Champion is essentially illegal in Commander. Maybe that's why he sold the card to a private collector in 2001. That being said, if you want to proxy it and include it in your cube or play it online in Cockroaches, it might be fun. Just don't inform my lord that I suggested such things. Since my orders were to brew the most expensive deck possible, this deck list contains only the most expensive versions of cards, not counting misprints or other similar conditions, meaning cards from alpha, beta, foil versions, masterpieces, judge promos, and other promos. So I will be presenting images of those exact versions of the cards. That being said, a Commander deck needs lands. Therefore, the deck contains 37 lands and 62 cards apart from the Commander. That means there's no premeditated cohesiveness at all. This brings up the question though, will my lord's deck be good? Are these cards expensive just for the sake of being rare, or is it due to them being good as well? Will 100 ultra expensive cards make the best deck by default? Will my lord's pay-to-win strategy really succeed? More than likely, his subjects will intentionally lose against him in order not to incur his wrath, so I'm safe in that respect. But I will nonetheless test this brew before presenting it to the court. As we go along, I will tally the ingredients. These prices being updated as of the recording of this video from NTG Stocks and Scryfall, which in turn gets its prices from TCG Player. So let's see what this brew can potentially do. To begin with, the deck is helmed by a huge beater that's as big as an opponent. Getting a single shot in will potentially eliminate that player. Unfortunately, it has Shroud, so you can't target it with Berserk. However, that doesn't mean we can't target the other beaters with it. The deck runs Force of Nature, an 8/8 Trampler for just 6 mana. Berserk would make it a 16/8 that can really do some damage. It gets sacrificed afterwards, which means that we don't have to worry about its drawback during our next upkeep. The deck also runs Shivan Dragon, Serra Angel, Nightmare, and Serendip Afreet to fly over opponents' defenses. The Angel having Vigilance makes her remain untapped in case she needs to block. The Dragon has Fire Breathing, which is great in order to sink a ton of mana into it in order to finish off an opponent. The deck generates quite a bit of mana, but we'll get into that later on. Nightmare's power and toughness are equal to the swamps we control. The deck runs 9 lands with a swamp type, but the deck also runs Cyclopean Tomb. This can turn any non-swamp land into a basic swamp. Not only can this give us more swamps when Nightmare is in play, but it can also be used to change our opponent's lands into swamps, similar to Quicksilver Fountain's effect. This means that it can deprive opponents of their utility lands as well as their colored lands, only making them tap down for black. So not only will this combo with Nightmare, but it will also make your opponent's mana bases a nightmare. The deck's also running the foil version of this Tarmogoyf. It gets pumped the more types of cards we're putting into our graveyard, so it's good for chump blocking. Jusam Jin is also a great blocker for being a 5/5 for just 4 mana. The 1 life loss at the beginning of our upkeep is negligible when we start the game with 40 life. However, a great chump blocker is in the form of Sedge Troll. This troll has the potential of being a 3/3 if we control a swamp, but it can also regenerate for just 1 black mana, making it an ideal blocker. The deck also runs Goblin King, which gives other goblins +1/+1 and Mountain Walk. Unfortunately, there aren't any other goblins worthy of being included in the Lord's Brew. However, the deck runs the Champs and States version of Mutavault. Since it's technically a goblin, it gets the boon as well as Mountain Walk thanks to the Goblin King. Saving the best for last, the best creature in the deck is Vesuvian Doppelganger. Not only could it become the best creature we have in play, but it could become the best creature an opponent has in play. On top of that, if something better comes along, we can change the Doppelganger into that during our upkeep. As is evident, apart from only a couple of creatures, the deck isn't going to make any impactful plays during combat apart from potentially taking out a player with Shivan Dragon, a creature pumped with Berserk, or our commander. Fortunately, the deck makes up for it with control elements. This helps keep the path clear of anything that might prevent 1996 World Champion to push through. First off, we're making opponents discard cards with Disrupting Scepter, Mind Twist, the foil version of this Thoughtseize, and Chains of Mephistopheles. The first 3 are pretty straightforward, so let's take a moment to understand how Chains works for those who've never played against it. Let's look at it this way instead. If you follow this diagram, it basically turns the card's oracle text into a simple to follow logic chart. This enchantment basically hurts players who would draw a card outside of their turn or multiple cards during their turn. So if the card to be drawn isn't that first card drawn during the player's draw phase, 2 things can happen. If the player already has cards in their hand, they discard a card first and then draw the card. If the player's hand is empty, they mill the top card of their library instead and don't draw a card. Hopefully this simplified how this card works. In any case, it prevents players from getting draw advantage during their turn and outside of their turn. If we were to be affected by it, we can simply discard the cards in our hand that aren't really useful for that moment in the game. Another way of messing with opponents' hands is Worth of Command. The way this card works is that it forces target player to cast a spell of our choosing from their hand. On top of that, you can control them while the spell is resolving. That means that you choose all targets for that spell. So if a player has Time Stretch in their hand, you force them to cast it and choose yourself as the target. Even if the player taps all their mana sources in response, the mana is still in their mana pool when you control them, so you can still use it to cast their spell. Either way, Word of Command has them tap down mana sources as needed in order to cast the spell. Other ways of messing with the top card of an opponent's library besides the chains are natural selection. If an opponent tutors for something to place on top of their library, we can cast this in response to them casting it in order to make them shuffle it. We can also use this to look at and rearrange the top 3 cards of their library. If all 3 cards are good, we can make them shuffle it. Now, if an opponent had cards to work with, we can just counter them. The deck runs Counterspell, the foil version of this Force of Will, Nether Void, and Invoke Prejudice. Since the deck is low on creatures, as long as we don't have our commander out, Invoke Prejudice essentially makes creatures opponents would cast cost twice as much. Nether Void simply taxes all players for 3 generic mana for any spell they'd cast. This also affects us, but as I mentioned earlier, we're okay for mana, so it might not delay us as much as opponents. Alright, what if opponents are able to draw cards and keep them in their hands long enough to be able to successfully cast them? Well, any creatures on the board can be dealt with thanks to Wrath of God. Even the deck runs ways of dealing with creatures over time as well. The Tabernacle at Pendrell Vale, Drop of Honey, and the Abyss all deal with creatures on the board. The Tabernacle might not tap for mana, but it gives all creatures an upkeep tax of 1 generic mana. That can add up. Drop of Honey starts cleaning up creatures from least to greatest during our upkeep. The Abyss is similar, but it triggers during each player's upkeep, and the active player has the choice of which one of their creatures to destroy. Keep in mind that this is a world enchantment, so you can have it in play at the same time as Nether Void. Even then, any creatures that do remain standing still have to go past our defenses. This deck is running Moat and Force Field. The Moat disallows any creatures without flying from attacking us. Even then, if they're able to pass through, Force Field allows us to pay 1 generic in order to take only 1 damage from an unblocked creature. The deck is also running Royal Assassin. We can just tap it down to destroy target tapped creature. Hopefully my lord isn't offended by the inclusion of this card in the deck, but I am following instructions after all. If things still go south, the deck has Navineral's Disc. We can activate this in order to destroy any permanents that aren't lands or planeswalkers. Speaking of which, the deck runs 2 planeswalkers, the foil version of this Jace the Mind Sculptor, and the Japanese pre-release promo stamp foil anime art version of Liliana Dreadhorde General. Not only can Jace be used to disrupt the top of an opponent's library, but it can be used to fix our own. We can also brainstorm with him. Additionally, he can be used to bounce a creature to an opponent's hand. This is especially useful if we want to save any of our own creatures as well before we cast a board wipe. His ultimate is something that probably won't be achieved without the proper support, but if achieved, can really set a player back, especially if they have an empty hand. Liliana's static ability grants us a card draw if any of our creatures died, so if we did have to wipe the board, at least we get card advantage from it. She also makes chump blockers with her +1 ability, which can also trigger her first ability when they die. Her -4 ability helps us achieve just that too, by making every player sacrifice 2 creatures. Her final ability is incredibly oppressive, so hopefully our control elements gives us the opportunity to pull it off. Doing so will put victory within our grasp. So, although the disc saves our planeswalkers and lands from destruction, if we did need to destroy all lands, we can just cast Armageddon and be done with it. The deck has some mana rocks and mana dorks, so we can manage. Other ways of controlling opponents' boards is by tapping things down and or keeping them tapped down. To this effect, the deck runs Winter Orb, Meek Stone, Smoke, and Stasis. These permanents are incredibly backbreaking and can make the game slow down to almost a halt since they limit how many of each pertinent permanent can untap each turn. Fortunately, the deck runs Candelabra of Tawnos in order to bypass being unable to tap more than 1 land per turn since we can pay for X with mana from non-land sources. However, if we start getting too hurt by these effects, we can just wipe them away with the aforementioned Navineral's Disc. We can also choose what to tap down with cards like the foil version of this Rishadan Port. We can use this at the beginning of an opponent's upkeep in order to deprive them of key lands until their next untap step, if they have one. Okay, so I've been mentioning this non-land mana sources for quite a bit. Let's see what they are. The deck is running Birds of Paradise and a foil Metal Worker. Since the deck runs 14 artifacts, we can keep in our hand the ones we don't need at the moment in order for Metal Worker to tap for lots of mana. As far as mana rocks are concerned, the deck is running Mana Vault, Soul Ring, Mana Crypt, and a foil Grim Monolith. These rocks and dorks help get some early game advantage as well as providing mana for when we have to cast Armageddon. The deck also runs ways for lands to be efficient with cards like Gauntlet of Might and Mana Flare. The Gauntlet makes all mountains tap down for an extra red mana, but it also pumps red creatures. That means that it pumps our commander as well as the previously mentioned Goblin King, Sedge Troll, and Shivan Dragon. Mana Flare makes all lands tap for an extra mana, so make sure to cast it during your own turn before you go off in order to get the most out of it before your opponents do. The deck also runs lands that tap for considerable amounts of mana like Mishra's Workshop and the Judge promo Gaia's Cradle. These only work conditionally, but if that condition is met, then they're amazing. Now that we've covered how the deck more or less operates, how does it not run out of steam? Well, by running cards like Brain Geyser, Wheel of Fortune, and Time Twister. Sinking a ton of mana into Brain Geyser can fill our hands while also digging through until we find what we need. Wheel of Fortune and Time Twister help us dig as well. It can also help us disrupt other players at the table. If we saw anyone's hand before or maybe they had tutored for something, then the wheels can be more detrimental to them than beneficial. Time Twister also has the added bonus of almost restarting the game since we recover our graveyard back into our library, shuffle our hand, and then draw a new one. Using these spells when we'd have no other card left in our hand is definitely the best way to go about it though. We can also dig deep through the deck with Bazaar of Baghdad. If we fill our graveyard, we won't worry too much if we can cast Time Twister later on. On the topic of recovering things from our graveyard, the deck runs a foil Replenish. That way we can also cheat in any enchantments discarded to Bazaar of Baghdad. We can also draw a card with Jayam Diatome at the end of the turn before ours if we have the mana to sink into it, or whenever we want as well. We can also draw a card by paying 1, tapping down and sacrificing the foil version of this Horizon Canopy. Another way of drawing cards is by casting our enchantments with Verduran Enchantress in play. 12% of the deck are enchantments, so she might get us a card every now and again. If all else, she can be used as a chump blocker in a pinch. Besides drawing, the deck can also tutor for things. The deck includes a Foil Academy Rector, which will no doubt make opponents think twice before attacking us. However, with so much creature hate in the deck, more often than not, the Rector is dying to our own effects. It will then cheat any enchantment we have from our library onto the battlefield, so you can choose whichever one is necessary given the situation. If it were a creature we needed, we also have the Judge promo, Survival of the Fittest. This allows us to discard a subpar creature in favor for something better from our library. However, the deck runs the 2 best tutors in the format, Demonic Tutor and Imperial Seal. These will straight up tutor for absolutely any card we need at the moment. The last tutor effect is a fetch land, Scalding Tarn. This blinged out land can tutor for any of the most expensive lands in the deck, which we'll discuss near the end of the episode. For those keeping track, we're still not done. There are still some more choice ingredients for my Lord's Brew. If we're running short on life, we can always sacrifice our commander to Diamond Valley and just send it back to our command zone. This will gain us as much life as an opponent has. We can just recast it later and sacrifice it again in case we need more life. And we can gain even more life if we enchant it with Web. 2 more life might not seem like much, but keep in mind that Imperial Seal takes 2 life away when casting it. Gaining all that life is important because the deck also runs Earthquake, which can help us win the game. With enough mana sunk into it, we can win as long as we have more life than opponents and enough mana to cast it for that necessary X. If not, then we can double it with Fork. For just 2 extra red mana, we can double Earthquake's effect. Another doubling effect in the deck is Copy Artifact. With so many great artifacts in the deck, this allows us to have 2 of those. Whether it's a Mana Rock, Disrupting Scepter, Cyclopean Tomb, etc. Or even as a copy of Ankh of Mishra. Apart from Scalding Tarn, this deck has no land-based ramp, so this really hurts those opponents that do. Copying it with Copy Artifact can be especially backbreaking. Within the deck, you'll also find a Judge promo Lightning Bolt. 3 damage might not seem like a lot, but plenty of Hate Bears and Mana Dorks are toast when targeted by it. Or, if our own creatures are targeted by opponents' burn and removal, the deck runs a foil Yavawaya Hollow. The final card in the deck is Eureka. If my lord is feeling especially confident or wants a challenge, then casting this will definitely spice up the game by having everyone cheat permanents into play from their hand. The rest of the deck are the mana producing lands. Here's a breakdown of which lands are included. As far as the final price of the deck, as mentioned earlier, the champion who won the card, Tom Shafeng, sold the trophy with the card to a private collector for $17,500 in 2001. It was recently posted on eBay for $200,000 but was taken down before completion. Therefore, I'm going to buy the price it was confirmed to have been sold at. Adding that to the price of the deck so far, it comes up to a total of $108,077.08. Since I know that 1996 World Champion isn't legal in Commander, and even then only my lord would have the only copy in existence, if any other lords and ladies of the court would like to sample this brew, you can do so by simply exchanging 1996 World Champion with the foil version of this Sliver Legion. This brings the total cost of this deck to $90,804.58, which I'm sure has to make this the most expensive legal Commander deck to date. This brew was definitely an interesting challenge. Although all I had to do was include the most expensive cards possible as of today's date, the deck still needs lands to run. The challenge was in taking these cards and analyzing them in such a way as to be able to pilot a somewhat functional deck. I don't think this deck can defeat an optimized or competitive deck that doesn't have any self-imposed restrictions, but it does contain some seriously powerful cards, so it remains to be seen how it'd fare against casual and janky decks. It was a lot of fun researching the prices for these cards all over the internet. Curiously enough, when I had this idea a couple of months ago, a foil Renin 6 was expensive enough to be considered for this list, but its recent banning in Legacy tanked its price. It was also great to talk a bit about Magic history and fun facts, especially about old and rare cards. If you'd like me to cover topics such as Magic rarities, the history of the game, historic standard decks, awkward interactions, rulings, etc., let me know in the comments. I have lots of ideas for this channel, but I don't want to spoil anything just yet. I would like to thank all my patrons for supporting me, and a quick shout out to all my higher tier patrons, the brewers, for their patronage. And to everyone, including the Lord of the Realm, thanks for watching this episode of The Brewery on the Commander Tavern. I am Demented Kirby, happy brewing and happy Thanksgiving.